I'm going to start off by saying it's actually really easy to tell the difference, because the following subclasses are two completely different designs, and that they're made by different companies, so they are not really related. It really is that simple. But this video is on how I can tell the difference between the networker subclass and explaining every one of their differences. This is mainly dedicated to the 465/0, 465/1, 465/2, 465/9, 466 and 365. This also covers the comparison of how different they were when they were new, because as we all know, all of them have changed a lot over the years. Okay, let's go through the basics first. BREL made the class 465/0 and 465/1, although some of the 465/1 units were partly manufactured by ABB when they took over BREL, and that's why some of the 465/1s have the ABB logo. With BREL being the main manufacturer of the networkers, and with British Rail placing the order for BREL first, I normally refer to them as first generation networkers. And now on to Alstom Metro Camel. They made the class 465/2, 465/9 and the 2-car class 466 units. Since the Alstom networker production started later, but not that much later, I used to refer to them as second generation networkers, but now I just refer to them as Alstom networkers. Yes, I am saying this because it's true. The Alstom networkers are related to the Pendolinos and everything else Alstom that we tend to forget about. So first, with the subclasses, I'm going to go through the most obvious difference. Now I know everyone does this to compare the networker subclass, but I'm doing it in this video anyway. Motor comparison. And this is basically how they all sound at the moment. So as of now, the BREL networkers have the Hitachi IGBT motors, and then all the Alstom networkers have the General Electric GTO motors. Now all of the Alstom networkers have always had the same motors since day one, while everyone knows that the BREL networkers were retractionized by Hitachi between 2009 and 2010, and they originally had brush traction motors. Now unfortunately I don't have any shots of those ones myself, but there are other videos of them on YouTube, and here's what a brush traction motor sounds like. So yeah, prior to Hitachi, they originally had brush traction equipment. And if I'm honest, I don't remember all that much of the brush traction motors that they used to have. Although like the 321, 315, 150 and BREL 1992 stock, I've known the networker pretty much all my life as well. And the fact that I was born in Orpington in Kent would have made it clear that I would have known it all my life. Although I think the main reason for knowing the networker for as long as I can remember is obviously the fact that my grandparents' house is by the side of the South Eastern Main Line in the same part of Orpington, and that I always used to watch trains from the back of the garden. While I may have seen a great deal of networkers in that location since the early 2000s, it was a line-side location, so they were all just running through at speed. So that's why for a long time I didn't really know what a brush traction motor would have sounded like. And when it comes to me visiting Petwood Station between 2007 and 2009, it's really the Alstom networkers I remember the most, probably because they were more frequently used on the Tunbridge Wells route at the time. Now, as unrealistic as this sounds, I always used to believe that the networker subclasses all had the same Alstom motors prior to the Hitachi refurbishments. So I used to believe that the BREL networkers were originally the same as the Alstom networkers, much like the 365 if anything. And yes, I thought that because I don't remember much of the brush traction motors, just the Alstom networkers, and the 365s of course, which we'll get to at the end of the video. It became clear to me by 2016 that the BREL networkers had different motors by then, but it wasn't until 2019 when I discovered that the first generation networkers had brush traction motors before Hitachi. And I think it was by 2021 that it became clear that all along there were actually two completely different networker designs, and it was by then I could finally tell the difference instantly, not just by the traction motors, by the body shell design. So now onto the body differences. In the 1990s, when they were all new, it was actually a lot harder to tell the difference than it is now. And another thing I should point out is that the Alstom networkers were originally not compatible with the BREL networkers, but very quickly they corrected that, and now you can often see them working together. Although even with the original design, I can still easily tell the difference. But most of the things that they have now which make it a lot easier to tell the difference to this day is really down to the refurbishment they had in 2005 at Doncaster. And before that, in the late 1990s, all of them had the cab ventilation system added on the roof. But even when they were new, it was still very easy to tell the difference when you put an Alstom networker with a BREL networker together. So if you notice, the BREL networker, as you can see, has the vents across the top between each door, whereas the Alstom networkers don't have any of those in the same position. And if you look at the underframe design in comparison, it really does give it away. And even the cab design is quite different. I mean, you get it, they are basically two completely different designs that are not related. And to this day it certainly is a lot easier to tell the difference than it used to be. Such as the running number now being located on the left hand side of the cab, whereas the BREL networker still has it on the right hand side. The position of the running numbers always used to be the same until the Alstom networkers were refurbished at Doncaster. Something else I should go through is the fact that all of the Alstom networkers have always had the Metro Camel logo on them. All of them were built at Metro Camel Washwood Heath in Birmingham, and the same goes for everything else Alstom built before the Pendolinos, with the Class 390/0 being the last trains to be built at Metro Camel Washwood Heath before it closed in 2005. Now in 1989, Metro Camel was bought by Alstom, literally just before the networker production started in 1991. And throughout the 1990s it was renamed GEC Alstom Metro Camel. And then in the late 1990s, when the 458s were built, it was renamed just Alstom. Mainly because they have the Metro Camel logo on them, most other people refer to them as Metro Camel networkers, but I refer to them as Alstom networkers because they were built under Alstom's ownership at the time. But the networkers aren't the only Alstom trains to have the Metro Camel logo under the ownership of Alstom. The Alstom 1996 stock originally had the Alstom and the Metro Camel logo in the same place. Although what's weird is the 1996 stock is meant to be newer than the 1995 stock, but it has the older Alstom logo and the Metro Camel logo, whereas the 1995 stock has always had the newer Alstom logo. You would probably think that it's down to a refurbishment of why the 1995 stock has the newer Alstom logo on it, but it turns out it's always had the same Alstom logo since the late 1990s, as you can see. But yeah, some Alstom trains had the Metro Camel logo on because Alstom owned the Metro Camel. At some point in their latest refurbishments, the 465/2 and 465/9 all had their doors replaced, but somehow the 466 escaped this treatment, and that makes the 466 the most complete and original. And I do believe that the original doors from the Class 465/2 and /9 are being used as spares for the Class 466. The 466 is basically just a two-car version of the Alstom Class 465, and it's pretty much the same except that only one coach on the unit is actually motorised, very much like the BREL Class 456. Now it's time to move on to the 365 Networker Express. Now it turns out that there are actually two different batches of the 365. 501 to 516 were built as dual voltage, and 517 to 541 were built as just AC powered only. Those that were AC powered only entered service first in 1996 on the East Coast Main Line, and the dual voltage batch entered service with South Eastern in 1997. although all of them were built at the same time in 1994, with the dual voltage batch being built first. And when they entered service with Southeastern in 1997, all of them were repainted straight into Connex Southeastern. Although when they were passed on to WAGN in 2004, they were reverted back to their original Network Southeast livery, and this is most likely how they did it. Because the Connex Southeastern livery that they got was just an overlay vinyl sticker, same as the 465/0 and 465/1 when they carried the same livery, they literally just put it over the existing Network Southeast livery. And when you look closely at the Connex Southeastern vinyl sticker, it looks like it was made to fit around an existing Network Southeast livery without damaging it. And when they were passed on, they just ripped them off just like that, and re-exposed its original Network Southeast livery. 365-502 was the first one to be passed on from Southeastern to WAGN in 2002. 502 was only passed on to replace 526, which was involved in the Potter's Bar rail crash, with the others not being passed on until 2004. Now, although the 365 had its original Network Southeast livery exposed, 365, 510, 519 and 531 were repainted to WAGN's own livery in 2005. And those in First Capital Connect started to get repainted in 2006, with the last one in Network Southeast being repainted by 2007. All except the 3 and WAGN livery got repainted in First Capital Connect. Now, in terms of the Class 365's manufacturer, I think the easiest way to put it is that the 365 is actually the BREL Class 465 and Alstom Class 465 combined. And it's a bit of both because it has the body shells from the BREL networker, but they have the General Electric G354CX motors, which is basically the General Electric GTO, which are basically the same kind of motors used in the Alstom networkers, and that they sound almost identical. So yeah, the 365 is basically both networkers combined, and this is what the Alstom motor on a 365 sounds like. They do sound slightly different to the normal Alstom networker. That's because they can do about 100 miles an hour, whereas the 465s of all subclasses can only do 75. And yes, the 365s have always had the Alstom motors, and those from Southeastern also had the same motors. Here's a video of one. Yes, I know the wheel slip protection kicked in at the first minute, but that was the only video I could find, and you just about made it out as a 365 anyway. And the front end that they got between 2003 and 2004, which basically earned them the name Happy Trains, was installed to incorporate a cab air conditioning system, and that's why they have that front end. I think they were installed on the existing AC batch first in probably 2003, and then as soon as those from Southeastern came in, they got the same treatment straight away, probably before they even got reverted back to Network Southeast. When the dual voltage 365s entered service with Southeastern, on the pantograph coach you can see that they have a blanking plate fitted to cover the pantograph, and then the blanking plate was removed when they were converted to just AC power. I think since 2007, which 2007 is probably one of the oldest memories I have of the 365, I was always convinced that the 365 was related to the Class 465, and it appears that the 365s are related to all of the networker subclasses, including the Alstom ones. But it's really just the motors of the 365 that are made by Alstom. Everything else of the 365 is mainly made by ABB BREL. Now, as a bonus section of the video, I will also talk about 465-301, aka 465-037. Now, I can't say I know all that much about it, but I'm just going to go through what I do know about it. I do believe 037 was originally built as a standard 465, and then very shortly afterwards it was converted to represent a prototype 365, and being temporarily renumbered to 465-301. But unlike the Southeastern 365s, I don't think 037 ever had a pantograph fitted, because if it did you probably would have seen it in this picture and also noticed that a class 317 is actually pulling it. Although at some point it did temporarily have its DC shoe gear removed when it made its appearance on the East Coast main line. And when the 365s were built, it was then renumbered back to 465-037 and restored to its original southeastern use and was put back into service. I also believe that it kept the brush traction equipment when it was temporarily converted, and that it stayed that way until it was replaced with a Tashi in 2009. So that's probably what I know about 037 aka 301. And it just so happens that 465-037 was the first networker to be seen in my revised outro that I created in 2022, although I originally came up with the idea of this outro shortly after filming it in 2021. But I didn't realise at the time that the first networker to be seen was 037, the prototype 365. Now while I'm at it, I should probably get this bit over with and explain the current status of all the networkers that existed. I'm going to start with the 365 first. I still can't believe the fate that they got in the end, with all of them being scrapped so soon. I mean, it was totally bad enough when Great Northern wasted away the Class 313s in 2019 and put the destruction order on them, even though the Class 313s are the oldest of all second generation BREL designs, and that the good thing is 121 and 201 are preserved for good, no thanks to Great Northern. But I'm just totally shattered to see the same thing happen to the 365s. It was just an absolute waste. Especially since they could have had other uses, like the plans they had to convert them all to parcels vehicles. Which, although it is good that they ended up using most of the Class 321s for that, but I wish that had happened to the 365s as well. They probably would have even been the best by far for that use. And it's even worse since the 365s are actually the newest of the networker family by far. Exception for the 168/0, but those are really turbo stars. Think about it, the production for the 465, both BREL and Alstom, started in 1991, and the 365s didn't start getting built until 1994. And they didn't even enter service until privatisation came in 1996. And scrapping the 365 is just like scrapping the Electrostars. And get this, even Tom Parker from The Wanted outlived the 365s by about 6 years. But the 365s only received that fate because of how long they were in storage for. They were far from scrap worthy in terms of their condition. And the 379s would have also received the same fate if they hadn't been salvaged by Great Northern at the last minute. But they should never have even left Greater Anglia in the first place. As for all the 465s on the other hand, as of now they really are far from receiving the same fate as the 365, as the Class 465/0, 465/1, 465/9 and 466 are all still in service to this day. However, the Class 465/2 have all been put in storage to make way for the Class 707, and they're still awaiting their fate in storage to this day. So at the moment no one knows what will happen to the Class 465/2, although the 465/9 and 466 were taken to Doncaster to be fixed, but they eventually returned to Southeastern, and most of them are all back in service. But if the 465 ever does get withdrawn from Southeastern eventually, I want to try my best to help preserve one of each type, both a first generation networker and an Alstom networker, because I don't want them to receive the same fate as the 365. Although 3 coaches of a 365 have been salvaged for the East Kent Railway, they can't run under their own power anymore, and they are not complete. I mean, I was relieved when I heard that the East Kent Railway had salvaged the 365, but it broke my heart when I figured out it was inoperable. I do want to believe that preserving a Class 465, both BREL and Alstom, is possible. Because if it was possible to preserve and restore Class 423-417, then it shouldn't be that hard to preserve a Class 465 when they're finished. I do think the 465 is at least as important as a first generation electric multiple unit, which the 465's basically replaced. To me, the 465 is actually really important. As a Kent guy myself, I've known them at least since the early 2000s. I mean, one of my oldest memories would have been probably 2005 or 2006. And I've seen all the networkers in not only the current Southeastern livery, but also Connect Southeastern and probably even Network Southeast, because they did still have Network Southeast right up to 2007. I mean, sure, I don't remember as much of the brush traction networkers, but looking back now, I know that the ones I saw in Connect Southeastern livery were definitely first generation networkers, because only the BREL networkers carried that livery. None of the Alstom networkers ever carried that particular Connect Southeastern. I think one of the memories I have with a networker in the early 2000s is travelling from probably Pettswood to Victoria or Charing Cross. The first one, which we didn't board, probably because it was going to a different destination, was most likely led with an Alstom networker, because I'm pretty sure I remember the Alstom motors on that one, especially as it was in the newer Southeastern Trains livery. The networker bringing up the rear from that one was a first generation networker in the original Connect Southeastern livery. The next one after that, which we did board, was most likely in the newer Southeastern Trains livery as well. I mean, I think it could have been an Alstom networker, but I'm not sure. But I know we definitely went via London Bridge Station, because I remember seeing a Class 456 in Network Southeast livery in the southern terminal platforms, and it was when the station was still in its old form before it was heavily rebuilt later. So just before I bring the video to a conclusion, I do need to express one of the main purposes of this video, and at the same time I also need to correct some misinformation from videos such as this one by Jago Hazard, which you could say was dedicated to Alstom, but used the wrong type of networker.
The traction equipment was derived from the earlier networker trains, also built by Metro Camel, which make a similar but not identical sound.
First of all, both networkers in this video are BREL ones. Secondly, they have Hitachi equipment. And also, if he was referring to an Alstom networker, the motors had nothing to do with Metro Camel. Just because Alstom owned Metro Camel doesn't mean Metro Camel ever made the motors themselves. I mean, just remember, the point of this video is pointing out that all the networkers are different, and that the BREL ones are not related to the Alstom networkers, no matter how similar they look on the outside. And anyone who says that a BREL Class 465 is related to an Alstom Class 465, it's like saying that a Siemens Class 450 is related to an Alstom Class 458. I mean, they are visually rather similar in design, but they are completely different. I'd say the story of the 458 is at least as interesting as the story behind the networkers, but I'm not going to go through all of it because this is about the networker, not the 458. But I will mention that the 458 being Alstom is related to the Alstom networker. And that being said, the 458's overall design actually resembles the Alstom networker a bit as well. But if you want to see a video covering the 458, go watch the video by the TfL3 called The Most Underrated Train in London. Which is true actually, it probably is one of the most underrated trains in London. But anyway, ever since 2021 I have always been able to tell the difference between the BREL and Alstom networker instantly. For example, there was that one time in 2021 when I was with someone and I pointed out an Alstom networker in the platforms, and he was like, "How do you know that's an Alstom networker?" I said that the livery design that they have now is different to those on the first generation networkers, and of course the obvious difference, the traction motors, but I could tell before it even started moving. But I really am that good at telling the difference now, and because it's so easy to notice the difference to this day, from a distance I'll be able to recognise the networker subclass instantly. I haven't tried this before, but I bet I could even recognise them with my eyes closed. No, really, I think it would be that easy, because you can also tell the difference when they're going through at speed as well. So I would actually like to try that. So this now marks the end of the video on how I can tell the difference between a BREL networker and an Alstom networker. It really is that easy, if I'm honest. So all I can say now is thank you for watching.